This ACC basketball season just keeps moving forward. Duke now with a 5-2 mark in the league. They're getting ready to take on Clemson this weekend, much closer to the first meeting with the North Carolina Tar Heels and a lot more. We're going to discuss all of that on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils.
Hi, everybody. Dick Vitale. Hey, make sure you listen, man, to Locked On Blue Devils with J.J. Jackson. He's awesome, baby.
You are Locked On Blue Devils, your daily podcast on the Duke Blue Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Locked On Blue Devils podcast. My name is JJ Jackson. Thank you for being here with us. This is our Friday, January 26th episode of the program here on Locked On Blue Devils. Excited to be talking about everything going on in the life of Duke athletics. Duke basketball with the big game coming up this weekend against Clemson. They're back at home inside Cameron Indoor, and here we are now 8 days away from the first Duke and UNC meeting of the season. There's a road trip to Castle Coliseum and Virginia Tech due up for Duke in a few days as well. And we're going to discuss all of that and more with our friend Isaac Trotter from 24/7 Sports, who will join us here on the program. If you have not done so already, please be sure to follow and subscribe to Locked On Blue Devils for free, wherever it is that you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating and written review. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button to watch the show each and every day. Like this video, give it a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. Really do appreciate your support of the program. So without further ado, let's bring him on. The aforementioned Isaac Trotter is back with us once again. I feel like we get smarter every time we have Isaac back on the program. So thanks for taking time here, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. Anytime.
Absolutely. So we got to dive right in, man. We're now 7 games into the league season for Duke basketball. A long year in the ACC. As you know, 20 conference games is a ton to kind of go through. What is your thoughts on Duke basketball now compared to where we spoke with you just prior to ACC play getting started?
Yeah, I feel like I'm still kind of waiting for this group to really matriculate, kind of come together a little bit. You look at some of the numbers, Duke's starting lineup hasn't really gotten to play together all that much compared to some of the other teams, throughout the top of the ACC and also throughout the top of the country, right? You've had Tyrese Proctor in and out of the lineup, Jeremy Roach in and out of the lineup, Mark Mitchell in and out of the lineup. So it's just in a little bit of a mismatch of John Shire trying to really find, hey, what's my rotation? How is this working right now? Now we're working through the Sean Stewart minutes, right? Trying to figure out who's going to come in. How does that work? So I feel like Duke is really starting to just try to figure out how to find themselves. And despite all of that, you look at the numbers, they're one of the best half-court offenses in college basketball. I think they're 12th nationally, or top 10 nationally in offensive efficiency on KenPom. This is a group that I think hasn't really even hit its stride yet, and you still start to see the signs of a team that could be really, really good. So I'm fascinated to see how this kind of comes together, because I think this group just needs a little time to really start clicking, and they're still 14-4. That's the beauty of Duke basketball.
Big positive, absolutely. Still one of the top 25 teams in the country. A lot to play for. They've got some work to do to get caught back up in the ACC league standings. But I'm fascinated by what you say there, trying to figure out exactly what this team is. On the offensive end, you think that there's certainly room for improvement. That's absolutely the case, I would believe, on the defensive end of the floor as well. Is it as simply as there have been so many moving parts, or is there a little more to that?
No, I think the moving parts thing is real. Their splits with and without Mark Mitchell are really stunning to me. I pulled it up earlier today. So with Mark Mitchell on the floor, we have 698 possessions. Without him on the floor, 529. So that's a pretty big sample size. They have a defensive rating of 90 with him on the floor, and when he's off on the bench, it's 107. Now that's on Hoop Explorer, right? So that's a 17 points per 100 possessions split there. If you have a plus 34 net rating with him on the floor, and it's just 10 when he's not on the floor. So it feels like he's really the key to all of this. I love to look at shot charts and kind of like what shot diet are you really trying to get? Duke takes and makes good shots. Like, they get a lot of shots at the rim. They have really good shooters that they're shooting a lot of open catch and shoot threes. That's the stuff that they create. Kyle Filipowski at the 5, I think overall offensively has been a big positive, but defensively, that's where I feel like this group really has to lock in. And, you have 3 guards who, I wouldn't say are plus size defenders. They're not small, but Tyrese Proctor, Jeremy Roach, and then some of the freshmen there aren't huge, right? You don't have that intimidating big 6'7" wing there on the wing. So it's really up to Mark Mitchell, I feel like, to really kind of hold this group together defensively. And his splits have been drastic. Him on the floor, him off the floor. So keeping him healthy, keeping him on the floor, keeping him, active and engaged offensively so that you get the best version of him defensively feels really, really monumental. And Duke, winning the ACC and obviously making a really, really deep run at March.
And in some ways, like, you need the defense to be in a better position with him on the floor. But the offense took a little bit of a back seat when he was out on the floor, considering the really slow start that Mark Mitchell had shooting the basketball to start the year. Here in league play, he's already got 3 20-point games. He's kind of snapped that cold shooting streak from the outside. It might not get to the clip that he was shooting a year ago, but I think just getting something as a net positive out of him offensively will really benefit the Duke team moving forward too.
No question. And the pressure that he puts on the rim is so huge as well, right? And then also the offensive glass, getting on the offensive glass. Like, this is a really good offensive team, and they haven't even offensive rebounded all that well. Their offensive rebounding rate is significantly higher with Mark Mitchell on the floor as well. 27% when he's on the floor is their offensive rebounding rate. That'll play, right? So that's the type of stuff that they need from him on the offensive glass, where they need him to create those second chance opportunities, drive the basketball in advantageous situations. Because I still remember that Arizona game early in the year when Arizona put Keshad Johnson on Kyle Filipowski, and they dared Mark Mitchell to beat them. That's going to happen more, especially in the big dance and especially down the stretch. I think about North Carolina. I think there's going to be opportunities where maybe Armando Bacot goes and tries to guard Mark Mitchell. He has to be aggressive, he has to be assertive, and he has to win those matchups because he's going to have opportunities to drive the basketball. And if he's efficient getting to the rim and can finish through contact or get to the free throw line, I feel like this Duke offense just takes a whole new, they just kind of reach a new level.
You mentioned the on-offs with Mark Mitchell and what he's been able to do for this Duke basketball team. Again, he had missed consecutive games prior to returning earlier in the week against Louisville. Duke's got another big test coming up this weekend when they take on Clemson. We saw Jeremy Roach come back from an injury, and then in the Louisville game, instead of the knee this time, it's kind of the ankle that hobbles him. He leaves the game and does not return for this Duke basketball team. He's been kind of undervalued in a lot of ways, and certainly Duke conversations, I believe, because so much of the focus has been on Filipowski and some of these freshmen and what Proctor has meant to this team. What have you thought of Roach's play so far, and how important is he to this team?
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like I feel so comfortable when he's on the floor.
Yeah.
Just making a lot of the right decisions this year. Career best numbers across the board, right? Shooting it really well from 3, 45% from 3. I think the turnover rate being so low is really, really impactful as well. Now, that's part of that shifted to where he's playing more off the ball, right? Not necessarily on the ball quite as much. But I just feel like there's a big comfort with him on the floor. And I don't know, it's just the constant, never-ending nagging injuries with him scares me, right? Because they really need him. Their best version can't happen without him on the floor, just because I feel like he just makes a lot of the right plays, just a lot of the right plays for them on both ends too. It's a real conversation there. If he's their best perimeter defender, I don't know if I would say he's their best, but it's pretty close, right? Like, and just the communication, having a veteran, understanding the situation, time and score late in games, being able to make open threes, knowing who to get the basketball to, knowing that this offense is Kyle Filipowski. Like, I feel like Roach hasn't ever gone out there and been like, hey, it's my turn, I need my 17 shots a night. I really respect that a lot about him.
No, and that's the point to be made, and the reason that it feels so undervalued when we're certainly talking in Duke circles is that you get to the end of the basketball game and it's like Roach had 17 points. It doesn't feel like that happened whatsoever because there are so many other big focuses it feels like Duke's got on the offensive end of the floor. And then yet again, Roach is knocking down the shot at a career best clip from the outside. He's driving and finishing and getting to the free throw line. I mean, he just does so much offensively.
Yeah, he's been huge. And you kind of look throughout the ACC, like these veteran guards the value of those veteran guards feels like it's a real, separator between an ACC that has a lot of questions, right? Like the type of level that RJ Davis is playing at, North Carolina is not a national championship contender without him. And Duke kind of needs that from Jeremy Roach too. And then you see some of the other teams where, maybe they have a little bit more youth in that backcourt. Like Wake Forest is super talented, but they have a lot of newcomers and new roles. And they're still starting to figure out hey, is it my turn? Cam Hildreth time? Is it Hunter Salas time? Is it Boopie Miller time? Right. It's like they're still kind of figuring that out. And I feel like with Duke, they kind of have that role allocation a little bit more settled if they could just get healthy and get to play 6, 7, 8 games in a row together.
That's the big if, and something that we're certainly going to be monitoring moving forward, starting with tomorrow. And you talk about guard play in the ACC, but when you look at the Duke and Clemson matchup, I think we got to talk about the big fellas in this matchup, and we're going to do that after our first time out here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Isaac Trotter from 247 Sports is here with us on the program today. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at GameTime, the #1 ticketing app out there. We love GameTime so much. It's also the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show you the total upfront, so you know that you're getting a great deal before you check out. You can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 apps. GameTime is obsessed with finding ways to help save money on tickets. They've got deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find those last-minute seats. With zone deals, you pick the section and GameTime picks the seats for big-time savings. And the GameTime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Right now, all GameTime users get $100 off a big game code ticket with code Vegas100. Terms apply. Just download the GameTime app. Use code Vegas100 for $1 off a big game ticket. That's right. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back on Locked On Blue Devils here today, JJ Jackson alongside our good friend Isaac Trotter from 247 Sports. All right, we're talking about Duke and Clemson coming up tomorrow. You mentioned the guards in the ACC, and certainly a lot worthy of big talk and consideration, but the fellas on the inside in this game, in Kyle Filipowski and I think PJ Hall from Clemson, also known for their touch away from the rim as well. I think that's one of the big matchups looking at this one.
Man, this is a war, right? Like this is big time stuff here. Both of these guys are so skilled, they're so versatile, and they mean so much to their respective teams. And I think we kind of know what PJ Hall is. I mean, if you can get him in foul trouble, maybe that's a thing. But I mean, he is really talented. I don't think he's even shot it from downtown as well as I expected. He's in the low 30s, and he's a better shooter than that. So that's obviously a huge matchup. I'm excited to see how much they get to guard each other tomorrow. The other thing too, though, with this Clemson team, defensively, they've been really, really rough defending the 3, which could open some opportunities up for Duke to get going from out there. But they're so good with their rim defense. Teams are shooting just 52% at the rim this year. So that's a big clash because Duke gets to the rim a lot, a lot of shots at the rim, and they're really efficient. One of the most efficient teams in college basketball at shooting at the rim. And Clemson does a really great job of taking that shot away, right? With whether that's a PJ Hall, blocking shots, right? I think he's top 40 in the country in block percentage, but they have a lot of length too. And Ian Shefflin is a guy who just does a great job of getting in the way defensively. So I'm fascinated by the chess match there and which team asserts its will the most at the rim. If Duke's able to get to the rim and finish at a high level, that's a huge game changer. If they're not, and they're just really reliant on jumpers, that changes the game a little bit too. So the war will certainly be won in the paint between Clemson and Duke. And we know that Clemson team will get after you on the glass as well. So it feels like a big spot for Mark Mitchell and Kyle Filipowski to really hold serve with PJ Hall and Shefflin on the glass. Yeah,
so we had Duke at 14-4 on the season, Clemson 15-3, so really, or 13-5, excuse me, really good teams going head to head with this one. Clemson starts off the year unbeaten. Then we've got the big game in the state of South Carolina, and we're not talking about Thanksgiving weekend when Clemson and the South Carolina Gamecocks go head-to-head on the gridiron. They were both unbeaten and kind of went toe-to-toe in a fun contest there in the non-conference. And ever since that game, Clemson has kind of been a little rocky, so to speak, and have lost a couple of games in the ACC. What's been the biggest reason for that, you think?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything. Chase Hunter hasn't necessarily had – I feel like there's a little new guy syndrome, right, with Joe Girard. Joe Girard comes in, and I think Chase Hunter's trying to figure out, hey, like, how do I get him involved? And Girard's numbers have been really good this year, but it's kind of come at a cost a little bit where Hunter doesn't necessarily look quite as, he doesn't have like that mean, like, I'm coming off the ball screen, getting to my pull up, and I'm nasty. I'm the best guard on the floor. Like, we saw some of that sometimes last year from Chase Hunter, who was one of the more underrated guards in college basketball last year. They just really haven't had that yet. And so I think offensively, it's really not been a huge concern overall. It's really more defense, and it's small perimeter guards, right? Joe Girard is 6'2" and not a plus defender. Chase Hunter is 6'4", right? Like, they've not gotten really anything out of Alex Hemingway, a guy that they thought was really going to shoot the three at a high level for them. And they're still kind of working through, like, who's the other guys that we add in that mix. Like, Jack Clark has been hurt and just kind of getting back into it. And I thought he was a really big piece for them, the transfer out of NC State. So it feels like they're in a little bit like Duke, where they're still trying to figure out their way a little bit. And it really does come down to, like, do we have a defensive stopper who can stay in front of the ball? They have not contained the basketball very well at all this year. Georgia Tech's guards kind of got wherever they want on them. Virginia Tech's guards got wherever they want on them. North Carolina honestly didn't shoot it that well and didn't have a great offensive day, but Miami the day before, their guards kind of got wherever they want on them. So it really comes down to if Duke's guards can get into the paint and create plays like that. I'm not really buying this Clemson defense as a thing. And I think it could really hold them back from making the NCAA tournament, which could be the final straw of the Brad Brownell era.
How does Kyle Filipowski concern this Clemson team?
Well, they match up decently well with Kyle Filipowski, honestly.
Sure.
They have the size, but I mean, like we said, PJ Hall fouls a lot, right? I think he's commits 4 fouls per 40 minutes, so that's a big concern for them as well. I'm worried about if I'm Clemson, like, I don't think I run the double at Kyle Filipowski right now. Like, throwing a double team at him doesn't make a ton of sense. His ability, I think his decision making this year has been great. Like, just the reads he's making, his assist numbers are good, but they could even be better. He's had a lot of potential assists that have gone astray, right? Like, guys miss shots or just the cuts are a little bit off, but I feel like his decision-making has been at a high level. And if he's able to just get to the rim and finish through contact, like, I'd expect it to be a big time war at the rim. If he's able to finish through contact and he's making those decisions and get PJ Hall in foul trouble, I think that's a big time win. Because I don't know. I don't really trust RJ Godfrey to come in or Chauncey Wiggins to come in, or even Jack Clark or Ian Scheffler. I don't trust those guys to necessarily be able to contain Kyle Filipowski. It feels like it's all on PJ Hall's shoulders to really win that one-on-one war.
One of the other Duke players that we certainly have to talk about, Isaac, when we're looking at this basketball team this season is Duke's point guard and Tyrese Proctor and what he's been able to do as of late. We saw earlier this week in Louisville, at the start of the game at least, the Blue Devils have everybody healthy and ready to go. And what that means is Tyrese Proctor found himself back coming off the bench as John Shire kind of went back to that lineup that was working with Proctor out. He responded incredibly well with a career-high 24 points, the most three-pointers he's ever made in a game, most shots from the floor that he's ever made from a game, and really looked like kind of the projected lottery pick buzz that he was having going into the year. What are you seeing out of him as of late, and what will he mean to Duke moving forward?
Yeah, he's got a big-time matchup because, again, like, he's like that big guard that could give a little Clemson some issues, right? And I just feel like he's – it's just been hard. Like, there's a lot going on. He gets injured. He's kind of coming off the bench. Then he's starting. Now he's back off the bench. Oh, now you're going to probably start again if Jeremy can't play, right? It just feels like there's not been a lot of cohesiveness there. But I was really impressed. I know that Louisville is whatever, but one of the worst teams in the high major ranks this year. But that type of game can really, I think, can parlay that moving forward. And if he's playing like this, where I'm not expecting 24 points on 16 shots a night, but I like the 4 assists and the 1 turnover. I like his ability to make the right decisions and to make the right reads. I think he's a really good shooter. I think if you look at his numbers, he's 39% on catch and shoot threes last time I checked. Like, he can be a knockdown guy for this group. And there's so many opportunities that you're going to have when the ball is through Kyle Filipowski's hands. And I just would love to see that 2-man game with them really start to emerge. And if that happens, where that 2-man game between Kyle Filipowski and Tyrese Proctor becomes maybe a feature of this Duke offense, not necessarily like a last resort that we get to at times, I think that's when you could start to feel like the comfort with this group start to really expand, because he can be he'd be a huge difference maker for this club. Like really, really a huge difference maker. And I think he's got a great matchup starting on Saturday against Clemson. And you have to really start to, it's time to go, right? Like there's no more time to wait. It's time to go. It's mid-January. It's ready. It's time, right? Like, and it feels like Tyrese Proctor is the light switch is starting to come on for him.
It's time to go. I mean, we're 8 days away from the first Duke-Carolina game of the season. What that will mean for the ACC, what that game always means for each program. We'll have a little bit of that conversation after we take our last time out here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. Locked On Blue Devils here today is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Of course, FanDuel is the absolute best and America's #1 sports book. New customers with FanDuel get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. We can't wait for Sunday conference championship game as you've got the San Francisco 49ers taking on the Detroit Lions, followed by the Kansas City Chiefs going head-to-head with the Baltimore Ravens. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet on these conference championship games, like those live same-game parlays. You can find the bets in the new Explore Hub, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, and so much more. So go ahead and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel is a proud sponsor of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. All right, we move forward here on today's episode of Locked On Blue Devils. JJ Jackson alongside Isaac Trotter from 247 Sports. Tell us a little bit about your work, Isaac. What are you working on these days?
Boy, we got a lot of stuff going on, right? Weekly 10 Takes column. We just did our national championship contenders list. Duke was in that mix as well of teams that could potentially win the national title. I think there's really 13 teams, and that's one of them. And then this week, we also looked back at some of our preseason prognostications, like what we kind of projected from this season, and then what it is now, what we got right, what we got wrong. So it's a busy time at 24/7. I'd love to have you join us.
All right, so talking about that in particular, again, teams that can win it all this season. You've got 13 teams kind of in that mix there. Another one of those teams, I'd imagine, is the North Carolina Tar Heels. Here we are a year ago. They don't make the NCAA tournament at all. Duke goes on to win the ACC tournament before being bounced by Tennessee in that second round. We're 2 years away now from Coach K's final game being in the Final Four against the Tar Heels. There's always so much riding on this rivalry and these games. But, man, for college basketball as a whole, Isaac, I say it's safe to say it's another year where these two programs are near the top of the sport. From the national perspective, is that the case as well?
Totally. And, I think Duke being like this and North Carolina obviously outplaying preseason expectations has kind of covered up a little bit of the ACC as a general, like some of the frustrations maybe throughout the rest of the league or some of the concerns with the rest of the league. But it's hard to really focus in on those when North Carolina is a legit national championship contender, Duke is a legit national championship contender, and we got 2 more of these wars coming up. So I think, from a national perspective, it's like I don't think many teams are looking forward to playing North Carolina or Duke, and I think a lot of eyes will be focused on the chess match between both of these teams because I feel like heading into the year we had a lot of concerns about Hubert Davis's ability to really maximize his roster. And early in the year, they were pretty justified. Later, it's been a question. And I think there's still later in the year, it's been really, not a question anymore about Hubert Davis. I felt like he's pressed the right buttons. And the same thing goes for Duke. Like, I still think people, from a national perspective, again, have some questions about John Shire's ability to maximize this group. And so it feels like a big couple months here for both Duke and North Carolina. And man, that game in a week is going to be really, really fun.
No doubt about that. First game starting in Chapel Hill, and then, of course, they'll end the regular season there in Durham. So before that, Duke has Clemson tomorrow, obviously, a Monday trip to Virginia Tech at Castle Coliseum. Duke's lost like 5 out of their last 6. They're in Blacksburg. What can you tell us about the Hokies?
So Virginia Tech, it's a weird team because they've when Sean Padula is playing at a high level, like they're really, really terrific. And then Hunter Couture had some injuries and then he came back and has played well. And then Lynn Kidd, obviously their big man inside, has been a revelation. But outside of that, it's a massive question mark about everybody else. Tyler Nickel has had some in moments, right? MJ Collins has been up and down. Mekhi Long was a guy out of Old Dominion that I really liked out of the portal, but he's really more a defensive rebounding effort guy. He hasn't really made a bunch of plays. I still don't think he's made a three yet this year. And then Robbie Barron out of Northwestern, another Northwestern transfer. It felt like they really loaded up on these like big versatile wings to try to help out some of their smaller guards. And it just hasn't necessarily clicked. They've been really inconsistent this year. But as we know, they're really, really good at home. And Clemson learned all about that, right? They just throttled Clemson at home. We've seen them play at a high level at home. They can score it. They can really shoot it. We understand that Mike Young's one of the best coaches in college basketball so far, especially from the offensive side. But I do have some concerns about them just from an overall talent, because it's like Padula, I think, is an all-ACC guy. Hunter Couture is an all-ACC guy. Lynn Kidd's a good ACC starter. After that, I think there's some real questions about the depth of talent with this group.
Taking a look at the ACC as a whole, you mentioned North Carolina and Duke kind of being at the top. Do you think it continues that way for the rest? I mean, here we are 7-8 games into league play. And again, there are 20 games that we've got to go through for this conference as a whole. Can anybody enter that conversation, or do you think it ultimately ends up being that two-horse race?
Yeah, I do. I think it's just those two teams that really do it. Florida State has started to play a little bit better. I still think it's a little bit, fluky. Can we see it against some better teams? I think would be fair. Although Jameer Watkins has been an absolute beast for them. The two teams that I still can't give up on from a talent perspective is Miami and Wake Forest. Miami has dudes, right? They're just not very deep. And Bensley Joseph and Nigel Pack together has not necessarily been great from a defensive standpoint, just two very small guards. When you combine that with a 6'7" center, even though I love Norchad Omier, you just are physically at a little bit of a disadvantage, and they haven't shot it as well as they need to. Like, you just need to have a supernova offense if you're going to make up for having a defense ranked outside the top 100. And Miami has a good offense. They don't have an elite offense. So that's one team. Wake Forest is the other team. I really like this club. Like, I think that's a really good team. But again, they're still trying to find themselves a little bit. They've had guys in and out of the lineup all year. They get Efton Reed back, and their numbers defensively have been awesome with him. Hunter Salas and Boopie Miller have been two of the best transfers in the country this year. We know that Cam Hildreth can be a really good player, but they're still trying to work into Mari Monsanto into the rotation. He just got healthy, big-time shooter. So I love the pieces that they have, but they still are kind of trying to find themselves. And that's a problem when Duke and North Carolina feel like they could get humming here in a second. So I think it's Duke and North Carolina in that top tier, and then it's a pretty big tier gap. And that's where then I throw in that Miami and Wake Forest conversation. And it's weird because we haven't said Virginia once yet. And I think I'm out on them. Like, they leave me wanting a lot on any given night.
And that's certainly a team that we're used to seeing towards the top of the league and that sort of thing. But the last team I wanted to talk about with you is a team that actually Virginia played a little bit earlier this week. And it's that fourth and final team in the state of North Carolina. We're talking about the Wolfpack there in Raleigh. Duke only sees them once this year towards the very end of the season. Feels from the outside, at least, that this has been one of the better starts to a season that Kevin Keatts and NC State have had in quite some time. Where are you at on the Wolfpack? Where should people find this team?
They're a tough team. I think that mentally tough. They've started to showcase that a little bit. I still question some of the overall talent, right? Michael O'Connell has been a nice addition for them out of Stanford, who's really stabilized things a little bit. But DJ Horn, some of their defensive metrics are not very good when Horn and O'Connell are on the floor together, just because you have two smaller guards. They're trying to find some of those big wings. Like Casey Morcell is a really solid player. Jaden Taylor, I've loved his defense so far this year, but it feels like they don't have a ton of, a two-way guy. Like, they don't have like that guy that they can count on both ends of the floor that doesn't have a lot of they have a lot of one-way players, right? Like DJ Burns is a one-way guy, and that's okay because he's really good at what he does. DJ Horn, kind of a one-way guy. Jaden Taylor is a one-way guy, really good at defense, still kind of finding himself offensively so far this year. Casey Morcell might be the closest thing to their two-way guy, but so that's those are the concerns that I have with that group. Like, they're a solid team. They're tough. I think they're going to play tight. They play in a lot of close games, but they don't shoot a lot of threes. They're not a great three-point shooting team, so they really don't have that that afterburner that can really put teams away. So that's maybe more my concern with them. But if you don't take care of the basketball against NC State, or you don't want to compete on the glass, they will punk you, and that's that's what I respect about that group, because they are not scared of anybody, even if they might not be the most talented team.
I love that. All right, Duke 14-4 on the season, 5-2 in the ACC. As we wrap up our conversation here today, again on our Friday podcast this week, Isaac, I want you to end us here with a little bit of optimism for all the Duke basketball fans out there. Kind of sell us on what this Duke team can be and reasons to be optimistic and positive going into the back stretch of the season.
Yeah, I still just look at like they've really haven't had that lineup cohesion that I talked about earlier, and they're still elite half-court offense. Like that makes me really excited if I'm a Duke fan, just because I feel like they're taking the good shots and they're able to create a lot more problems. Teams are game planning for them, not vice versa. And so I feel like this group, when you have the Kyle Filipowski at the 5 and his ability to stretch the floor, and you get Jeremy Roach and Jared McCain and Caleb Foster, Tyrese Proctor, all 4 of those guys can really shoot it from downtown. I think playing Sean Stewart more, over Ryan Young is a great move for this group, because I think you could play different defensive coverages, have a little bit more explosiveness. And then the Mark Mitchell's a huge X factor. Like, I still think this is one of the more talented teams in the country. And it's just a young group who's still trying to really find themselves. And the glimpses have been really good. Their A game is really, really elite. I just feel like they're not that far away from finding that consistency where that A game is happening, twice a week instead of once every 3 weeks. And that's where I like this group.
We love that. That's what we want to see. We want that A game all the time from the Duke basketball team, that's for sure. Well, you brought your A game today, Isaac, and we couldn't be more appreciative of the time. I couldn't be more appreciative myself here personally. One more time, if you will, my friend, tell us about your work and where people can find it, where they can follow you on the social platforms and that sort of thing.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Isaac__Trotter, and then 247sports.com. That's kind of where most of my stuff is. And then I usually tweet out all my work as well. But appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll do this again sometime soon. Again, that's our friend Isaac Trotter joining us on the program today. And you heard it there at the end. Be optimistic. We got a lot to play for left in this season with Duke basketball. Certainly love hearing all of that. That'll do it for our show here today on the program. Thanks so much for your time. We're back at it again very soon. I'm JJ Jackson. Thank you and good day.